My name is Dave Pierce. I'm from Bath Stop Wall Coalition, and I've been selected to chair the meeting tonight. And the title of the meeting is Trident, Spending Cuts and International Relations. Now, the Bath Stop Wall Coalition, and mainly for the peace lobby in Bath generally, this has been an ultimate treat for us, because we in our little group have two very favourite speakers. One is Bruce Kent, and about 4 weeks ago we had Bruce here to address a sixth form conference in Hayesfield School. Unfortunately, you had to be under 18 to get in unless you were taking part. So some of us were there, but not many of us. Bruce, as you know, was chair and general secretary of CND for a large number of years, and was always tempted to describe him as a veteran peace campaigner. But I'm always a bit wary about that phrase, because one is that the word veteran quite often has militaristic connotations, and Bruce is very keen on not having militaristic words in the language. So it might well be that he would object to that. The second is that when you see Bruce in a room full of 120 or so 18-year-olds, actually Bruce looks like one of the younger people. So he was here. One of the things he did, and talked to the sixth formers, was he tried to promote something which I hope you all got or intend to get for next year, which is a Hudson's Peace Diary. And he was printing these things about, and he lodged several in the library, and he encouraged people to use them as a point of reference. So I did just that today. And in fact, looking it up, I discovered that today is the International Day for the Alleviation of Poverty. And therefore, it's absolutely right that we should get Kate here, who is our second favourite speaker, not second in order, but second in order, our second favourite speaker, to talk about the relationship between spending cuts and spending on Trident. Because neither of those two things, in my view, are anything to do with the alleviation of poverty whatsoever. So absolutely relevant that that should be our thing for tonight. The last time Kate came was, I think, probably a couple of years ago now, when she spoke around a film which we showed at the little theatre called Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bowl. And that was a good evening, and I'm sure this one's going to be tonight. Many of you will know Kate. Kate is primarily an academic. I say primarily, her career has been an academic career. She's written widely on international politics, but also significantly on the history and development of CND, called now more than ever, I think, history of CND. Like Bruce, she was chair of CND and is now General Secretary of CND, and is very heavily involved in Stop the War Coalition. Kate's going to speak for about half an hour on the topic of Trident, spending cuts and international relations, and then there'll be time for us to join in with questions and comments. So I'd like you to welcome to the meeting tonight Kate Hudson.
Well, thanks very much, Dave. It's lovely to be here in Bath. It is indeed a very timely moment to discuss this question. I didn't actually know it was that special day today. But it's obviously very timely because it's just a couple of days now until we're going to see a massive demonstration in London against the cuts. Some of you I know have donated to CND's full-page advert in The Guardian, which advocates one good cut that we can make instead of obliterating and smashing to smithereens our health service, our education, all the things that we hold dear, all the great achievements of the welfare state that have taken people out of poverty, brought equal opportunities irrespective of the conditions of our birth and so on. So it's a great time to be addressing this issue, and it's a great time to remind ourselves that every year the government spends between £2 and £3 billion just on the existing system, and it plans to spend over £100 billion on a replacement. And if you compare that with the types of cuts that are being made to all the necessities of our lives, it's incomprehensible that that kind of spending should go ahead. We're not alone in CND, obviously, now in thinking that it's incomprehensible that that should happen, because all the public opinion polls now for some time have shown a substantial majority against replacing Trident. And in the preambles that they put to these questions, they do actually refer to the economic crisis and choices about spending. And every time it's that choice about spending, you know, what is the government going to prioritise for cuts, for spending, that leads people to oppose Trident. So this, in a certain sense, this terrible situation that our governments have placed us in economically has also been the way in which many people have come to understand the disastrous waste that is Trident and Trident replacement. Many of us obviously understand the legal issues around Trident, the moral issues around Trident, but it's the spending factor which has really opened up the issue to so many millions more people. If you look at the opinion polls actually and the breakdown of the opinion polls and who's voting what, it's interesting to note that the people who are most concerned about it in age terms are indeed young people, so the kind of 18 to 26 category, massively opposed to Trident. So they haven't fallen for any of the kind of Cold War hangover stuff that we hear from our government. And in terms of social class, it's not the kind of Guardian reading types apparently who are opposed to Trident in overwhelming numbers. It's the so-called social classes C, 2, D and E who are most opposed to Trident. So that's a kind of an eye-opener, I think, to a lot of people who think that people who are likely to read The Sun are more likely to be pro-Trident. Well, that is, poll-wise at least, not the case. We've also found ourselves in a situation where many people who in the past have previously supported Trident and supported nuclear weapons and been very hostile to CND and the peace movement are actually now our allies as well. You've probably seen letters or articles and so on from retired senior military figures saying that Trident is militarily useless and should be scrapped. So it's a very, very broad church now that we find ourselves in, along of course with traditional allies like many of the trade unions and the faith communities as well. But it's as if, you know, it's permeating, this common sense approach of scrapping nuclear weapons is permeating to all areas of society. So to replace Trident would be out of step with popular opinion. Strangely, it would also be out of step with the government's own analysis or assessment of the risk that Britain faces, the security threats that we face. A couple of years ago, when the new government had just come in, it published a new national security strategy in which it downgraded state-on-state nuclear war to a level 2 threat. And level 1 threats were things that we would all recognise as level 1 threats, like climate change, terrorism, things like cyber warfare, natural emergencies, environmental issues and all the things that go along with those. So simultaneously to downgrading the threat and recognising that there is no nuclear threat that we currently face, they strangely insisted that they will continue with that level of spending. So there's a bit of a paradox within the government on its approach to Trident. The government has also done something else which is very interesting, because one of the first things it did on arriving into power was to take spending on Trident out of the kind of ring-fenced pot that it had previously been in, that this was money sacrosanct for nuclear weapons and wouldn't be touched, and they put it into the MOD budget. And of course, once they'd put Trident spending into the spending it would have to make on Trident, once that had to come out of the MOD budget, then that forced the MOD to make decisions about what kind of military things it actually wanted, and whether it wanted to keep Trident or spend money on Trident, or whether it wanted to prioritise conventional weapons spending or the army and things like that. So what we've actually seen over the past 2 years is huge cuts to the army, slashing of regiments, tens of thousands of military personnel losing their jobs, various types of project aircraft and all kinds of other things being slashed in order to keep Trident. And of course, not that I'm sure most of us aren't very keen on any form of military spending, but of course that has caused tensions within the military sector and within the MOD itself. Why should the MOD spend money on something which most people consider to be a political weapon or a weapon of terror, and not actually a military weapon that can be used? So that's been quite an interesting development during this government, and of course it does significantly divert money from other priorities, and even within the Tory party these types of debates have been taking place. When we had a fringe meeting at the Tory party conference last year, and one of the delegates was participating in the discussion after the debate, and he said, well, for me the most important thing is this question of the opportunity cost of Trident. When the spending gets to a certain level, surely we have to say, well, actually that costs too much and we would rather spend it on other things. So the Tories are coming to that conclusion, so that's all to the good. One of the areas, of course, which we have to address, particularly with the trade unions, who are by and large very supportive of our work. We've had some new trade union affiliations in recent times because of the spending cuts and the link to Trident spending and so on. But in some areas we are still having to address the question of Trident and jobs. And there are still some sections, obviously, of the workforce who would prefer to retain Trident and have Trident replacing it in order to retain jobs in the sector. But the more research that we and others have done, the more compelling is the argument that in actual fact retaining Trident is bad for jobs, because the expenditure on Trident will retain around about 6,000 to 7,000 jobs at Barrow, but if you invested that money, say for example in the housing sector, that same money could create in excess of 60,000 jobs and create a housing stock which would help to meet people's needs. There are all kinds of other examples of how you could invest that money in other industrial sectors, skilled industrial sectors, where you could have a massive increase in jobs for the investment. But that's certainly one of the areas around the kind of the spending argument that we need to continue to address. And one of the things I would ask you to look out for later this year is the outcome of the Barrow inquiry, which is a research-based inquiry that's been commissioned by the Nuclear Education Trust, which is CND's charitable wing, and an independent company on behalf of NET has been interviewing people in Cumbria around Barrow, people from the workforce, from the trade unions, the local authority, other companies and so on that MPs and things, to try and take a serious look into what the alternative future could be for Barrow industrially in the event that Trident is no longer made there, in the event that it's not replaced. So doesn't become diverted into should it or shouldn't it be made, but what if it isn't? What are the alternatives? And I think those outcomes are going to be very interesting. So for those of us who are concerned about that, or we face those kind of arguments in our workplace, that's going to be an important piece of research. So I think one thing I could really say is that amazingly the status quo around Trident, which prevailed for a long time, does finally seem to be breaking down. It's happening slowly, it's happening bit by bit, but that kind of top level cross-party consensus is now falling to bits. We know that within the coalition government there are the two parties have quite different perspectives on Trident and its replacement. One of your local MPs, of course, is the Lib Dem, who will have put forward his view to you, which I think is probably that we don't want a like-for-like Trident replacement. We want look at some other form of nuclear weapons. But nevertheless, although the Trident Alternatives Review, which the Lib Dems in government are conducting, doesn't look at non-nuclear alternatives, nevertheless the very fact that the MOD is being forced to look at alternatives to Trident is in itself a step forward. I was at Lib Dem conference recently, and it's absolutely clear that Lib Dems, in the run-up to the next Liberal Democrat conference, will be putting forward a resolution to shift the party policy away from this kind of halfway house position that it currently has, and there will be a fight at that conference to ensure that the Lib Dems go into the next election with a scrap Trident policy. So that in itself is extremely positive. But they are in government with a party which seems still, or at least is officially and formally still wedded to a like-for-like replacement. So what's the situation with the Labour Party then? What change is taking place there? Well, even though it was the Labour government in 2006 who put the resolution to Parliament about replacing Trident, Tony Blair appeared to be very gung-ho pro-Trident. It was pushed through by Des Brown. Nevertheless, now there are, over the past couple of years, some indications that Labour will reconsider and opt for a review of Trident. I think it's the case that perhaps the leadership is being forced into that position by the National Policy Forum, which the party is currently undergoing. But I wouldn't rule out that Miliband himself is genuinely willing to re-look at it. Certainly in the leadership hustings 2 years ago, he did say, when questioned, his position was that we should review Trident. It wasn't just yes, we should replace it without any questions. But that it should indeed be reviewed. At the recent Labour Party conference, it wasn't on any official agenda, but there was a Q&A session in which he was asked about Trident, and he did again say that he thought it should be reviewed, and the National Policy Forum has said the same. So they're actually currently, they say they're going to wait for the outcome of the Trident Alternatives Review, which is being conducted by the MOD for the Lib Dems. So we were quick to point out that, why did the Labour Party want to sort of tail behind Lib Dem policy on this? Why didn't they go for a review themselves and include a non-nuclear option within it? That would be the great thing to do. So that's where we're at in terms of lobbying at the top of the Labour Party. Have a proper review, unconstrained, considering a non-nuclear option as well. A quite interesting development, which you may have heard of, these various top-level groups, so-called, self-named top-level groups of sort of senior politicians who are kind of anti-nuclear, but not willing to say scrap Trident, but to sort of wanting to try and get serious about getting rid of nuclear weapons. The one in Britain, there's one in Europe, but the one in Britain is strangely led by Des Brown, who's obviously feeling a bit guilty perhaps for his role in the Trident replacement vote in Parliament. But so they're sort of chugging away, and that's a cross-party thing which involves Sir Malcolm Rifkind and Ming Campbell as well. So strange and interesting developments, but they all present a kind of further breaking down of what we've always been told was a kind of totally fixed and sort of totally essential position on Trident. So, for example, we've always been told that we have the minimum deterrent and we need to have them out at sea all the time. One of the big discussions that is actually taking place is, do we actually need to have them out at sea all the time? We could have 2 or 3 subs instead of 4 if we don't have them out at sea all the time. So once you've broken down the idea you have to have them out at sea all the time, why do you have to have them out at sea at all? You know, the sort of logic is that, well, actually, you could end up really not needing them or not having them at all. There are a couple of dates coming up which obviously shape our work to a considerable extent. One is that another thing that the Tory-led government did was to postpone the decision on whether we actually replace Trident until 2016. So that gives us 4 years, or 3.5 years now. No, 4 years, sorry. And then the other thing, of course, is that the election, next general election, takes place before that in 2015. So the current government is probably not going to be the government, or not the formation of government, that will then be overseeing the decision or to the taking of the decision in Parliament. It also means that the next election is almost certainly to be a big debate, or part of it will be a big debate around Trident and whether or not Trident should be replaced. So that gives us an incredible opportunity, and it also gives us this framework in which to be working to campaign to ensure that at least one of the parties goes to the polls with a total anti-Trident position. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there for us, and I think that above all, the parties, particularly the Labour Party, I think, has to understand that opposing Trident isn't a vote loser, but it's a vote winner. You know, still we tend to hear that Labour has concerns that they'll look as though they're being soft on defence, they'll have the kind of Michael Foot experience, you know, whatever. But the situation is very different now. They only have to look at the polls to see that that's the case. Not everyone is convinced that Labour will change. We had a fringe meeting at the Tory Party conference this year, and I was debating James Arbuthnot, who's the Tory chair of the Defence Select Committee. He's also in this top-level group of sort of people wanting multilateral nuclear disarmament. But he said, I don't think you'll have much luck changing Labour policy, you know, because they are concerned about looking soft. But you may have more luck with Tory party policy. So, that's who knows, but that's good. And in C&D, certainly, we will continue to press all of them. You know, if Tories want to give it up because they want to spend money on something else, fine. You know, we just need to make sure it is given up. In terms of attitudes internationally, there's been some interesting developments here as well. As I'm sure you're aware, the global mood is overwhelmingly anti-nuclear. The only people who are pro-nuclear are the kind of 8 or 9 countries that actually have them. So everyone else has been agitating, the 180 whatever countries, been agitating for a long time that the nuclear weapon states should actually give them up. And it's only really when I've been to international conferences, you know, things like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review conferences, I realised how serious those other countries actually are that we should give them up. You know, it's not just an abstract thing. They are very seriously agitated about that. And of course we have seen some nuclear reductions. We've seen the New START treaty between the United States and Russia in a quite significant bilateral reductions in nuclear warheads. Those have been positive. There should be more of that. There are currently obstacles to more of that because of the US insistence on the missile defence system, which of course Russia thinks is aimed at it, and so does China, so that's the sort of block to further reductions. But nevertheless, one wouldn't say that the New START thing was nothing. It is a positive step in the right direction, but the mood in the international community is that we need more rapid change. I think to some extent that finds expression through organisations or developments like the Global Zero campaign, which again is all these sort of top level famous people like Queen Noor of Jordan and all those types of people, plus quite a lot of retired politicians and so on. So there's a bit of a kind of pro-Global Zero bandwagon taking place, which is good. I mean, if you can have a bandwagon, that's a good one to have. But, that's indicative of a strong desire to have kind of extra parliamentary or extra state pressure on this issue. But I think what's perhaps more interesting is the way in which this demand is actually beginning to find some concrete expressions at the global level. So instead of just sort of rhetoric about, we need to do something about nuclear weapons and all that kind of thing, there are actually currently two quite serious diplomatic initiatives or state-led diplomatic initiatives on the question of nuclear disarmament. I think the jury's out on whether either of them will have much success, but nevertheless I think they're important because they are concrete efforts, not just wishful thinking statements. The first of these is the UN initiative towards a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. I expect you know that there have been resolutions within the United Nations for a WMD-free zone in the Middle East since 1974, I think, coming from the region, but also supported by Britain and other global power type countries as well. Obviously, Israeli possession of nuclear weapons, the sort of suspected possibility of proliferation of nuclear weapons by Iran, and then possible follow-on proliferation by some of the Arab states, that's concentrated people's minds on the necessity of doing something about it. But the result is that under the auspices of the United Nations and the NPT review process, Finland is working to host a conference in Helsinki in December of this year, bringing together all the state parties in the region to begin a discussion around WMD and getting rid of them in the Middle East. I can't think of anything more fraught with problems, in fact, than to try and bring that about, but they are very serious about it and they are having some success. The fact that it is WMD, in other words also chemical and biological weapons and not just nuclear weapons, gives Israel obviously an interest in participating in it. So that is something positive which is very likely going to take place. One of the interesting things, and one of the reasons why CND is so interested in it, is that the Finns have a very strong orientation towards civil society involvement and engagement with anything they do at a state level. They're sort of always consulting with people. And so they have actively sought to have civil society input into their process before the conference takes place in December. So CND's international conference last weekend, which was held in London, was designed to contribute to that. So we had a number of disarmament activists from the Middle East, from Israel and Egypt and Bahrain and Syria and so on, together with CNDers and others, to talk about this issue and the issues around it. And we've got a whole set of feedback and our thoughts. I hope they will be useful, but nevertheless, it's a way of showing that we value that process, and there are large numbers of people who feel they have a stake in it and want to try and take that forward. So that's very positive. And the second positive development internationally is an initiative from the Norwegians. The Norwegians are very active in international circles for nuclear disarmament. They don't have nukes themselves, but they're very concerned about possession of nuclear weapons. Our own government does work with the Norwegians on verification of nuclear weapons and disarmament and all that kind of thing. But this new initiative that they've taken, they're holding a conference in Oslo in February to talk about the humanitarian consequences of the potential use of nuclear weapons. And this, some people say, well, of course we know there's humanitarian consequences. We always know, if you drop a bomb, there's going to be terrible things happening. But this issue of the humanitarian consequences has really sort of hit international circles in a way that one might not expect, to the extent now that the International Red Cross has taken a position against nuclear weapons because of the catastrophic health consequences, not just in terms of radiation, but in terms of not being able to look after the victims because the hospitals would have been destroyed and the doctors and nurses would have been killed. There's a much greater understanding of the environmental consequences of a nuclear exchange. So even if you had a limited nuclear exchange, say, between India and Pakistan, agriculture globally would be massively impacted upon, to the extent that you would have millions of people dying of famine and starvation because crop production would be devastated by the increase in the temperature globally, even by a small exchange. So there's an increasing understanding from humanitarian agencies that opposing nuclear weapons is not just like a political thing which CND weird people want to do for some political reason, but it's actually something that has terrible human consequences. And so this conference in Oslo is going to take place in February, and one of the things that we are doing, and we're going to be doing with parliamentary CND over the next couple of months, is inquiring of our government, are you going to take part in this conference? Because there's a question mark over whether they will. Maybe they think it's just a fluffy thing and, whinging people and all that sort of thing. But we need to put pressure on them to engage in that process, because the Norwegians and all the other sort of non-nuclear states that are engaged in it are extremely serious about it. And it also opens up for us an opportunity of working with new layers of organisations, because unfortunately the Red Cross in Britain hasn't seen the light yet, as the International Red Cross has. But the fact that the IRC has changed its position means it opens the door to us to make overtures towards those kind of humanitarian NGOs and so on, and get them on side with us, so we sort of break out of our traditional range of contacts. So, to conclude, Chair, I would say that this is a very, very positive moment for the anti-nuclear movement for a variety of reasons, but I feel that we do have the opportunity to change policy in Britain, and we do have an opportunity to ensure that Trident replacement never happens. I've heard that said not only by nuclear campaigners but by many senior political figures, that they think it will actually just never happen. Our role, of course, is to ensure that it never does. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Right, shall we open up the meeting now to questions, discussions? John.
I saw an item on television today in which it was talking about a successor to Trident, and by that I presume they meant Trident Mark II rather than scrap it altogether. I hope I'm wrong in my supposition.
Well, yeah, currently the discussion in government circles is not covering the idea that we shouldn't have one at all. They're talking about whether we should have the same thing again, or whether, as some of the Lib Dems suggest, we should have a kind of a smaller, potentially cheaper version. Some of the options which Ming Campbell considered when he was Lib Dem leader were things like putting nuclear warheads on cruise missiles on Astute class submarines. In other words, ordinary conventional submarines, just put nuclear warheads on ordinary missiles on ordinary subs, so you wouldn't have to build a whole new generation of special nuclear weapons carrying submarines. So that's the kind of options that some of them are talking about. Yes, it could be good if it's the kind of development away from nuclear weapons where you're sort of downsizing and diminishing its importance. But obviously we would want to see them talking seriously about no nuclear weapons at all.
What about reports that the government's already commissioning major works and committing a lot of spending to Trident as if it's already been decided?
Yeah, this is something that parliamentary C&D has been very engaged in asking, as well as people, lobbying about it and campaigning, consistently asking questions. Does the fact that you're spending money up front mean when you get to the decision point you're going to say, well, actually we've spent so much money on this, we can't actually turn back from it? And they've been repeatedly told, no, these are just things we need to get in case the decision is for nuclear weapons, and it will not tie us to that ultimately. Whether or not one can believe that, who knows? But they insist that they're just things that you would have to order in advance, and if you didn't, when it came to the decision point, you wouldn't be able to go ahead if you did want to go ahead because you didn't have the stuff ready.
So from their point of view, it was just money wasted.
Well, from our point of view as well,
it's already money wasted.
It's already money wasted.
From our point.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So they will just have to write it. Yeah.
What about the position of an independent Scotland in this? Because that's where they need to try.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. This is because say a scenario, say if they do have a referendum on Scottish independence and they get a yes vote and then the SNP are elected and the SNP's got a scrap Trident position, what would happen then? Well, there are many different views about this. One possibility is that yes, they might actually genuinely be able to get rid of them and kick them out. They might be allowed to kick them out. If so, where would they go? That's one question. C&D, in conjunction with Scottish C&D, has produced a publication called Trident Nowhere to Go, which looks at all the supposed possibilities for relocation within England and Wales, all of which have been considered by the government in the past and deemed to be unsuitable. So West Wales, for example, which is one of the areas that's been considered. Milford Haven, that has massive oil terminals. You'd have to close down all the oil terminals, lose all the jobs there in order to build a whole new, submarine berthing area and nuclear warhead storage facilities. So that's a non-viable situation. Another alternative is to have it down at Falmouth, which of course is National Trust's property, and you'd have to demolish a village in order to develop it there, and it would destroy the tourism in the area. So there's no place really where it could actually go to. I think the problem about it, which Jeremy Corbyn raises, he said, well, they won't be allowed even if they have independence and declare they don't want it, they won't actually be allowed to get rid of it. And there will be some deal done whereby either they say, okay, well, we're going to get rid of it when we found somewhere else, so it'll be like a sort of long leasing arrangement which never actually runs out, or it will become a kind of sovereign English base like Guantanamo in Cuba. So it won't actually be in Scotland, it will be in Faslane. It won't be in Scotland because that will be a bit of England on the banks of the Loch kind of thing, so it will be retained there. So it's a very, very positive thing that that issue is raised by the independence debate and the position of the SNP. Whether or not it will actually ever be allowed to happen is another question. If it did happen, the big question for us is what are we going to do about it? We don't want to just get it out of Scotland, we want to get rid of it altogether.
Okay, we have another question which is not about Scotland. Richard.
We now know that at least one of the explosions in Fukushima last year was a nuclear explosion, not just a hydrogen explosion. So how is CMD attitude towards the building of the next reactor in anywhere else?
Well, we're completely opposed to nuclear power. I think our fourth strategic priority is close down the nuclear power industry, and so we are strongly engaged with the Stop Nuclear Network, which has been working with the Hinkley Group and the other groups, around the Bridgewater area. So we're very committed to that. We've done a certain amount of work against the development of new nuclear power stations and work with other allies on that. So we are very committed. I would be wrong to give the impression that we spend as much time opposing nuclear power as we do nuclear weapons, because opposing Trident is our number one priority and we spend most of our time doing that, but we are very much opposed to new nuclear power in any form. In fact, tomorrow evening we're having a meeting in Parliament chaired by Caroline Lucas MP, jointly with the South Asian Solidarity Group, which is campaigning in India against the opening of a new nuclear power station at Kavankalam in Tamil Nadu, which is actually on an earthquake and tsunami zone, and there's been protests of hundreds of thousands of people there in India. So we're trying to sort of link up the issues and say we shouldn't have new nuclear power stations anywhere.
And do you know, as someone in London with close links to residents of the more than we have here, has the report on the corruption of governments in the Department of Energy made any progress with MPs? Do you know about that?
I've heard of it, but I don't know what's happened with it.
No, because it's very important. We've just had the Transport Ministry actually admitting to having made a big cover of the Virgin train fiasco. And perhaps it's time to have another go at showing that the nuclear people actually have, the Department of Energy actually has a nuclear industry people working in Parliament, feeding false information to Parliament. Yeah, I think that's very important, because also, of course, we were very aware of that issue immediately after Fukushima, when it became clear that the government department had turned to the nuclear industry to give it lines to feed to the press and the media, about what was happening in Japan. Yeah, no, it's shocking.
Who's in Parliament is CND?
Well, people from most parties. So Jeremy Corbyn is the chair. There are. Jeremy Corbyn MP is a Labour MP, and he's also a vice chair of CND. So he's also now chair of Stop the War Coalition, actually. So he's a sort of anti-war and sort of pro-disarmament MP with a long track record on these issues. I think he joined CND when he was 15 or something like that. So.
The vice chairs are Caroline Lucas from the Greens, Angus Robertson from the SNP, Elvin Clwyd from Plaid Cymru, and I think it's Julian Huppert from the Lib Dems. So we've got a kind of proper cross-party thing. And what we always try and do when we have an EDM is that the first six signatures are from across the parties, so it's not ever just sort of one or the other. We do sometimes get Tories signing the EDMs as well, actually, but they're not involved with parliamentary C&D. And then we've got a range from across those parties who engage to a greater or lesser extent on different issues. The significant thing has been an influx of Lib Dems since they've been in government, because the unilateralist ones are annoyed about, making concessions to the Tories over it, as they see it. So it's been strengthened by the Lib Dems.
Any locals?
Sorry?
Any locals for us?
I'd have to check. If you give me the names, I'll check.
You were mentioning somebody from the Isles.
Oh yeah, Tessa Munt, who's also chair of the Mid-Somerset C&D group, is very active. She's got a sort of junior post in the Treasury, but in order to take that government post, she said that she would have to be able to vote according to her conscience on Trident. So even though she's in the government, she continues to have a scrap Trident position and to be active on it.
I wonder if I can ask something about the growing anti-Trident replacement lobby that you talked about. It just seems to me to be an unholy alliance at the moment of kind of military people who want more spending on battleships and aircraft carriers and pacifists and people like us who now I suppose what I would like to discuss is how realistic it is to hold up a placard saying scrap Trident replacement, save 100 billion, and do this, i.e. stop, end student loans, end student debts, all this sort of thing. Because I suppose cynically what I feel is that if Trident is not replaced, what they'll do is build a couple of aircraft carriers and reform a couple of battalions or regiments or whatever they are. So that's the thing that worries me, and I'd be interested really to know what you thought C&D's position should be at that point. How should we respond to that? I mean, clearly we'd be pleased that Trident was not being replaced because we're the campaign for nuclear disarmament. But I mean, I don't want to see more aircraft carriers.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I'm not going to say you can only oppose Trident if you have this other set of values as well. As far as I'm concerned, you called it an unholy alliance. I'm not sure it is unholy. I think it's wholly good that people would want to get rid of nuclear weapons, whatever their motivation. But I understand entirely what you're saying. But I think it shows that for us, although C&D has a particular struggle, we can't limit our struggle to C&D and what C&D can stand for and achieve. If we're in a position where we've managed to change policy, get in a government that's voting down Trident replacements, and so we can stop that, we have to continue our struggle to ensure that government spending priorities are in line with what we would like to see it spent on. Not just, they'll go and spend it on conventional defence. We then have to have a struggle about making sure that it actually goes to schools and hospitals instead of things to put on our unused aircraft carrier. It's a linked struggle. And one of the things that C&D Council agreed about 2 years ago, when it became clear that there were going to be devastating cuts, was that we would work as much as we could with anti-cuts organisations, so people would understand the relationship between the two things. And I think that's why we're going to be there on Saturday, you know, because there is one good cut. There's only one, well, I mean, you could cut the war as well, you know, but there are a few good cuts, and we have to fight for those, but also fight against all the bad cuts as well. Yeah, so it's a sort of an interlinked process.
Okay, so you think it's an alliance which is worth maintaining whilst Trident is still on the table?
Yeah, I think so.
Mike?
When Liam Fox had to resign, it turned out that he was working with an appalling organisation called the Atlantic Bridge, which appeared to be more interested in furthering American strategic interests than British strategic interests. I'm worried that we always do what the Americans say that we should do, and I was encouraged by the case yesterday where we didn't extradite that poor bloke to the Americans. I wonder if they are actually getting less powerful than they were. I don't know. But though I can't see them taking it lying down if we just cut their nuclear weapons completely.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously, we have a historic, very strong, formal relationship with the United States, as well as all this guff about we speak the same language and all that sort of thing. Since 1958, we've had the US-UK Mutual Defence Agreement, which is the most extensive nuclear sharing agreement ever in the world, you know, which is also thought to underpin the special relationship in foreign policy, you know, whereby we're always tailing behind them and all that sort of thing. So it exists as a formal relationship as well as a kind of, you know, political and cultural one. Interestingly, when it sort of come up over the past couple of years about whether or not Britain would continue to have nuclear weapons, when it became serious enough as a question that American opinion was sought, the kind of views from behind the scenes that I heard were twofold. One was, oh no, you know, they don't want to change the status quo, and the other was, actually, they don't care about it. We're talking about 4 subs, you know, 150 nuclear weapons. They've got thousands. You know, it's a drop in the ocean. You know, so I mean, I guess which position would prevail ultimately, I don't know.
Okay, further questions?
I was going to ask a similar thing about the American involvement. You did mention the United Nations, some international group of representatives. Did that include American?
We mean the Global Zero thing. Yeah, funnily enough, this kind of slightly strange trend of people who sort of have been very, very pro-nuclear, who are now saying we need to have multilateral disarmament, but go on about it sufficiently that you think they must mean it in some way, you know. They also include quite a lot of Americans, the most significant ones who first went off on this track were Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, and a number of other very senior Cold War criminal type people. And they did a huge statement in the US media, I think it was in January of 2006, it's been going quite a long time, saying that because of the new global situation where you have sort of asymmetric wars and all that kind of thing, you don't have a nice balance between the Soviet Union and the United States where they know each other and have spies and all that sort of thing. It's sort of a very unpredictable and unstable situation. There's more likelihood of proliferation, and so the situation is just too dangerous to have nuclear weapons anymore. They obviously, I think they've genuinely come to that conclusion, and their view is that the American ones is that the US should kind of break its sort of dependence on nuclear weapons, or sort of addiction to nuclear weapons, and begin a process of what they call climbing down the nuclear ladder, and they've got a whole raft of steps by which the world can move toward, the nuclear weapons states can go towards zero, which includes starting off with things like coming off hair trigger alert and all that kind of thing, and with bilateral reductions, and then when the bilateral thing gets to a certain stage, then the other countries coming too, so you're sort of on this process down to zero. But no one does anything silly like strapping Trident on the way. You have to sort of all participate in together. So there are a lot of American diplomats and politicians involved in that, including people who've been incredibly serious figures, high-level figures in both Republican and Democratic administrations. And then we see the same thing in Europe as well, former presidents and prime ministers and all sorts of things, also having the same kind of view about nuclear weapons in Europe, and they're some of the people who are pressing most hard about getting rid of US NATO nukes in Europe. They're imposed on certain countries to try and get rid of them, like Germany, for example. So there's this kind of European thing going on as well, this kind of top level thing. So yeah, the Americans are involved in that as well. So that's the sort of pressure that's going on. And then Global Zero is kind of more for celebrities, I suppose. So that happens, and they did that film Countdown to Zero, which has been promoted around the place. So, some of the things, maybe one wouldn't do it like that oneself. We think, well, is that actually going to bear fruit? But I feel as though all of the things together, if they may engage different people in different ways. People who might be close to C&D might be open to Global Zero, and if it encourages them to think about it or take action, that's good.
Do you think if we could get the replacement of Trident cancelled and Trident scrapped, that would have some kind of beneficial impact in that kind of sea of different initiatives and global trends? I mean, do you think it would have much of a knock-on effect?
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, if you ever ask a politician who's still claiming to be a multilateralist, they always say, well, of course we've got to get rid of nuclear weapons, but there's no point in us getting rid of arms first. I mean, the idea that Iran is going to respect us for that is ridiculous, But it would inevitably have a big impact.
It would also give us some moral ground to stand on, to try and apply pressure on other countries.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that politicians tend to say, is the thing about status, and our seat at the top table. And in fact, those of you who've read Tony Blair's autobiography will know that when he talks about Trident in it, he said, well, we had this debate in 2006 and I listened to both sides and I thought there were arguments both ways, but in the end I decided in favour because of the status issue. So that they do think in those terms. And again, at the Tory party fringe, James R. Buffett said, the only real argument that comes up now for it is to do with our status, and the politicians mean that, and they think it's important about their role in the world, and it's quite hard to break that, so it's not actually a kind of, it's not a military thing, it has to do with this kind of status thing. But I think that's quite a hard thing to break. But in actual fact, if you think about it, given that 180 whatever countries want us to disarm, who is it that is impressed or thinks it's a good thing that Britain should have nuclear weapons? And how is it giving us this mythical status? It must only be in relationship to the other nuclear weapons states and how we position ourselves in relation to them. And one of the things that people say is, because I was on this Voice of Russia radio debate about Trident. There's this guy from the Bow Group, which is the right-wing Tory think tank, and he was saying the British would never tolerate it if France was the only nuclear weapons state in Europe. I wouldn't want to do that. And I said, well, actually, I think probably most people don't know whether France has nuclear weapons or not, and don't really care. So it's like that. It's operating in a bit of a fantasy land that's a bit of a parallel universe to ordinary people's concerns about it.
Absolutely. This review that's taking place at the moment, are these sort of issues being discussed as part of that, or was it purely just looking at alternative systems to try and... It sounds like it's quite important politically, because it's going to be looking at, it's going to be looking at these issues in a bit more sort of depth. And there is some sort of concern that it's going to be behind closed doors, but we're not going to see the conclusions.
Well, I think the problem with the review is that I think it's not really going to. Well, may not see the outcome, but I think they are probably only looking at it in terms of what kind of kit can be used. I'm not sure that they are considering the strategic issues around it. What is looking at that, though, is yet another initiative, so many things going on, which is the Trident Commission, which is led by Lord Des Brown and Ming Campbell and Sir Malcolm Rifkin. So it's a sort of cross-party thing. So it's sort of semi-parliamentary because they're all in Parliament. It's not a formal parliamentary thing. But they are looking into all aspects of Trident replacement, including the possibility of non-replacement. And they've got a bunch of what they call commissioners, some of whom are opposed to Trident replacement, some of whom want Trident replacement, but they've all entered into it on the basis that they have say they're going to have an open mind. So there are arenas in which those things are being considered. But I think the absolutely fundamental thing that we're arguing for is that there has to be a strategic defence review which also actually includes Trident, because the last strategic defence review didn't include Trident, which is supposed to be our strategic nuclear deterrent. It's completely bonkers. Ideally you should have one before the next general election, but you would certainly have to have one after the general election before you have the vote and debate on Trident. Otherwise how can anyone assess whether or not we really need it? You have to be able to look at all the issues and consider all the implications of it before that decision takes place.
Will the conclusions of that one review be published?
Yes, it will be, yeah.
And just in two parts, really.
Sorry?
In two parts, really. What is the, if you like, the destructive power trial? And really to balance that up, what is the credible threat that is supposed to, if you like, oppose? So, what does Trident represent in terms of destructive power? And what are we facing that we could justify the world having that kind of firepower?
Each nuclear warhead is 8 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb, and we have a stockpile, a total stockpile of 225 warheads. But one of the things that this government did when it came in was announced it was actually going to reduce the stockpile. So we're in the process of a stockpile reduction. We'll probably end up with about 160 or 180. So in world terms, it's a relatively small arsenal. If you calculate it out, it's a kind of sort of 320 million people killing capacity. In terms of policy, as I understand it from things that Nick Harvey has said, the Lib Dem who was a defence minister before he was kicked aside recently, it's still operating on the sort of capacity to destroy Moscow, so as a sort of big city buster type weapon, capable of killing an urban population of millions. So that's the kind of, a strategic approach that the weapon system is still, not operated on, but hypothetically operated on. Although, of course, nowadays it's justified in terms of, well, potential threat, possibly a rogue state or something like that. But of course, that type of argument is very much undermined by the idea that actually terrorism or non-state actors are likely to be the most significant threat that we face. And of course, the Trident nuclear weapon can be no use in dealing with any of those kinds of threats. So it's redundant, really.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question. Nick?
We've been very good in our Stop War Coalition this year. We've had two major successes and one continuing success. Two majors, the cancellation of drones conference with the assemblies involved, people feel very fucked about, and the magnificent schools, sixth form assembly that people in the group worked extremely hard at getting together, and you've already heard what an outstanding success that was, and that they're going to do it again. They'd like us to do it again, which is brilliant. And of course, the other brilliant thing is that we got turned out every Saturday with our vigil outside the Abbey. So what have you got lined up for us to do next year? Now organise us all and make us work terribly hard.
There are two things which are kind of non-London based and therefore applicable. One is that next Easter we agreed at conference last weekend that we would have a big event at Aldermaston to highlight the continuing developments there, where the nuclear warheads are produced, and the spending on Aldermaston prior to any decision on whether or not Trident will go ahead and whether or not new warheads will be made. So this kind of unauthorised spending and this continuing bomb factory. So that's going to be on Easter Monday. So we're hoping that obviously that everyone from Bath will be coming along to that and not booking their Easter holidays in the sun at the same time or anything like that. So that's one thing. The other thing, which is even more specifically applicable, potentially, is that Bruce Kent is going to be engaged in a Trash Trident tour in the month or so after the Easter event, so maybe in May, that kind of time. And it will be a targeted tour of Britain focused on specific towns and cities where Bruce will hold events with local campaigners and dignitaries and all that sort of thing, targeting MPs as appropriate in particular ways.
Not nuclear,
and maybe we're thinking we might be able to help out with bus advert things and all that sort of stuff. So kind of a high-profile visitation from Bruce as part of the Trash Trident tour, focusing on working with local individuals and so on as deemed appropriate by the local group. Mm-hmm. So if you were interested in hosting such a visit from Bruce on that tour, we could work together, and give you any kind of backup necessary.
We will.
Yeah. Okay. Unless there's an absolute vital question, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close now. I would like to say, in terms of what Nick's just said, that this Saturday, when we do hold a vigil outside the Abbey, a number of us won't be there because we'll be in London, so numbers might be a bit depleted. So those who don't normally turn up at the Abbey, it would be really nice if you're not going to London, if you could turn up at the Abbey for some time. I mean, we do vary our theme outside the Abbey. It's a general peace vigil, but sometimes it's anti-Trident, sometimes it's don't attack Iran, and sometimes it's end the war and bring the troops home. So any of those things might be going on. The second thing to mention is that hiring a room like this actually costs a lot of money, and Monica will be holding my what I usually keep my blood pressure pills in to take your donations on the way out. I'd like to thank you all for coming, for turning out tonight. I thought an extra jump on tonight, so I thought it was going to be chilly. I'm sorry about do hang about afterwards and have some of the coffee which I think we've arranged. Finally, I want to thank Kate for coming, and it's there are things you can read and things that you can listen to, and it's always really informative to listen to you and to hear what you've got to say and the way in which you put things into context. There are a number of things which I will take away with me tonight. One is that thought that the non-nuclear states are just as angry about us holding nuclear weapons as the nuclear states are about the possibility that one of the 190 might want to develop one. And it just seems to me like that's a crazy bit of world politics, which really needs to be sorted out. It's a real shame that the United Nations can't do that. The other interesting bit is the bit about the most opposition to Trident coming from Registrar General's Class C D&E, which would not be, I think, the most obvious thing. The other thing, just in passing, I would mention is when you were fishing around for places in England to replace Faslane on the Scotland issue, and you mentioned Falmouth, and that might not be possible because it's a national trust area. I would remind you that where they were going to hold the drone conference in Falmouth, a national trust building, and we couldn't get Simon Jenkins or any of those other people to actually take any interest in it. So I think if you said good replacement for Faslane would be Falmouth, Simon Jenkins would say brilliant. Anyway. Enough of that. Thanks very much, Kate, for coming again, and I think we ought to show our appreciation in the usual way. Thanks.